Hello guys, today I'm going to be doing a video on AC Origins using the Steam Deck, and I'm going to be starting it off with 800p on the lowest preset. And as always, if you like what you see, sub to the channel behind as well. Alright, let's jump into the settings. Alright, this is the game that I'm kind of working on, trying to get all the achievements for. It's a bit of a grind, but thought it'd be a good idea to go test it out on the Steam Deck. And it actually has a lot of presets. I thought it would only have 4 or 5, but it has like 6, I think. So I'm going to spend around 2 minutes on each preset, and at the end we'll go through the battery settings and my optimal settings for this game on the Steam Deck, and yeah, hopefully it will do good. Now the area that we're in next to the pyramids is quite light, it's not as intensive as the cities, so we were able to hold 60 FPS with some dips into the high 50s, which is great. It's a good sign. But yeah, let's go and jump into a main city and see how it performs there. Okay, now that we're finally in the city, we can see that FPS is not as stable as what it was before, as you would expect. So it's far more intensive. We're still in the 50s with some dips into the 40s, but as you can see on the graph or on the actual overlay, the CPU and GPU are fully maxed out. All the cores as well on the CPU are fully maxed out, which you don't see normally on the Steam Deck, or in general actually, I guess, on normal PC. But yeah, the game is a little bit more stuttery, as you can see with the frame time graph. But if you cap the FPS here to 40, 60 isn't as doable. You'll still drop down into the 50s and 40s. So that's why I'm going to go with 40 FPS cap here, or even 30 FPS cap. That will get rid of the stuttering and the actual lag spikes. We are pulling 27 watts as well, since that system is maxed out, which will give us around an hour and a half of battery life as well. Alright, now jumping up to the low settings. As you can see, FPS is far lower than what it was before. We're on the 40s now, and even then, we are still getting some stuttering here and there. It's not a constant stutter, like as you can see in the frame time graph, but it will happen here and there, especially when I pan the camera around. But if you cap the FPS here, we are in the low 40s, but I think we can get away with the 40 FPS cap here. But just to be safe, a 30 FPS cap here would be good as well. Now we can't try out FSR for this game, since the in-game resolution only has 2 options, 720p and 800p, so there's not really much of a headroom. There's not much of a headroom for FSR to give us some FPS boost, so we're just going to ignore that. But there is a resolution scale in the in-game settings, which I'll be trying out later on, once the game becomes more or less unplayable. Alright, trying this out with the 40 FPS cap now. I want to see if we're going to get any FPS drops or any stuttering. We just got 1 there, but obviously the frame time graph looks way better now, way smoother, and we're only getting some minor stuttering here and there. It actually happened only once, and it hasn't happened since, which is great. So yeah, 40 FPS is most likely doable. But if you run into a heavier scene, you might still dip down. Let's actually go inside this building here and use the torch. See if we're going to get some FPS tips here. Yeah, loading into this building, we had a little bit of a lag spike. And running around. It's slightly dropping, but it's not too bad. It's only like a 2 FPS drop. Alright, let's go jump up to the medium settings. Playing the game with medium settings. FPS is slightly lower than low settings, maybe a couple FPS. There's definitely a major drop from very low to low. A low to medium, it's not too big. Still able to hold 40 with some dips into the high 30s. So I think a safe bet for this preset is definitely a 30 FPS cap. 40 FPS cap is still doable, of course, but you just gotta know that you will fall into the 30s, which is still fine. This game is definitely doing much better than I was expecting it to, because when this game came out, everyone was having FPS drop issues, lagging issues, and nobody could actually play this game at max settings, I remember. So the fact that it's running on Linux and it's not a native port for Linux, and we're able to get a stable frame rate going, is pretty awesome. Alright, let's go jump up to the high preset. And now playing the game at high settings, you can actually tell the difference between the lower presets versus the higher presets. The game looks far better on the high presets. Even though we have a lot of options, each of them give you a slight boost in quality, and it definitely adds up. FPS is a bit lower. The lowest I've seen it is the mid 30s, but we're still able to hold 40 FPS in the city area, which is really nice. The game's overall feel is about the same as medium. You can get some micro stuttering here and there, but it's nothing too major. If you cap the FPS, especially to 30, it will most likely fix the issues. And we only have 2 more presets to go through, very high and ultra, and at that point, hopefully it's still playable. But either way, after that, we're going to be doing the battery optimizations and the optimized settings. So yeah, let's go and jump up to the very high settings. Alright, now with the very high settings, we can see there was actually a massive decrease in our FPS. We are averaging 34 FPS, 33 FPS. We are so close to the 30 FPS mark. Not left with much headroom there. Oh, we're actually falling to the high 20s now as well. The game is obviously still playable at 30 FPS, but I'm mainly worried about those heavier scenes, those more intensive scenes where you will fall down into the mid-20s. It's not guaranteed, but you just want to have some headroom there in case of a heavy scene. The game looks fantastic at native res and at very high settings. It's also surprising that it's playing this well at very high settings. These open world games are super intensive on your CPU and GPU at the same time, so I'm honestly shocked how well it's doing. Now, this doesn't look too good for ultra settings. Hopefully we're still able to hold 30 FPS at ultra, but honestly, not looking too likely. Alright, now final preset, the ultra preset. Seems slightly lower than the very high settings, like we lost 2 or 3 FPS from it. Still able to hold 30 surprisingly in this area, with some dips into the 20s. Now the settings I would go for is around medium to high settings at 800p, with either a 40 FPS cap or a 30 FPS cap. But I think a 40 FPS cap is definitely doable at those settings. Should be quite stable as well. But for the battery life preset, I might drop it down to 30 and put a power limit as well. Alright, now playing with my optimized settings. I do have a couple of settings that are super intensive still enabled, but I didn't want to have everything on the lowest settings just to get the best performance. I want to have a good balance between quality and performance. Now the one issue with this preset is the battery life. We're still pulling 25 watts, which will give us around an hour and a half of battery life, which isn't a lot. So I think for that, we're going to drop the settings down to the lowest and have an FPS cap with a power limit, and hopefully we can get a decent power usage. Okay, I just tried dropping down the resolution scale to 50%, and I don't know if you can see this, but the game looks super blurry at this point. Okay, so I tried playing this game at the very low settings with the resolution scale set to 80%, a 30 FPS cap, and a 10 watt power limit to start it off, and even then, it was still stuttering way more. Was kind of unplayable at that point. It didn't feel the best, and we were still pulling 17 watts around there, so it wasn't the best battery life either. So I think it's best to leave it as it is. Just optimize the settings, and I would play a native, honestly. And yeah, that's it for the video, guys. If you made it to the end, appreciate you. And if you like what you see, sub the channel, we appreciate it as well. See you next time.